It is not the first time. It is not the second. It is another chapter in a story that keeps repeating itself, always carrying the same paradox at its center. In the very same diocese, where a bishop has closed the traditional Mass in almost every parish under his authority, a traditionalist community has just purchased 26 acres of land for a major new construction project. On one side, a door closes. On the other, a construction site opens. Restriction and expansion, occurring in the exact same place, within the exact same month. By the end of this video, you will understand why this is not an isolated local curiosity, but a specific and recurring pattern, and why it reveals considerably more than it first appears to about where the Church's future is actually taking root. Begin a little over a year ago with the first chapter of this particular story. The setting is the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, in the United States. A new bishop, Michael Martin, arrives to take up leadership of the diocese, and one of his first significant actions, announced in May 2025, is a drastic restriction on the availability of the traditional Latin Mass across his territory. Traditional celebrations that had continued for years across multiple parishes were consolidated and closed. The ancient Mass was concentrated into a single designated chapel, with strict capacity limits placed on attendance. A fixed and limited number of faithful permitted in that one remaining location. Traditionalist Catholics throughout the diocese were, in effect, told to return to their local parish and to the ordinary form of the Mass celebrated there instead. And the restriction did not end there. In a subsequent pastoral letter issued in early 2026, the same bishop went further still, eliminating altar rails used for kneeling reception of Holy Communion. Even those faithful who wished simply to kneel while receiving the Eucharist, a posture of reverence practiced across many centuries of Catholic worship, found the physical support for that posture removed from their churches. Individually, these might appear to be small and largely administrative gestures. Taken together, they point unmistakably in a single consistent direction. Move now to the second chapter of this story, considerably more recent. It carries us into the summer of 2026, within the broader and already well-documented controversy surrounding the Society of St. Pius X. On July 1st, at Écône in Switzerland, the Society consecrated new bishops without the Pope's mandate. The following day, July 2nd, the Holy See formally declared that act schismatic. It needs to be said honestly, as this channel has consistently maintained throughout its coverage of this story, that consecrating bishops without papal mandate is a genuinely serious act, and Rome's severe response to it reflects real and legitimate canonical concerns. This is a documented fact, not a minor detail to be waved away. And here comes the specific move made by the Bishop of Charlotte in direct response to these developments. On July 17th, he published a pastoral letter addressed specifically to the faithful of his diocese who maintain some association with the society. "The door of the church is open," he wrote, inviting them to return to full communion and specifically urging them not to attend liturgies celebrated by the society, now formally described as schismatic. These are, on paper, genuinely affectionate and pastorally warm words. But they were written by the very same bishop who had, over the preceding 14 months, made ordinary diocesan life considerably more difficult for exactly the population of faithful he was now inviting back through this specific letter. Faithful who loved the ancient liturgy and had already experienced, directly and personally, his diocese's restrictive approach toward it. And here the story takes its most genuinely surprising turn, arriving at the third chapter, the one that actually gives this entire narrative its shape and its title. Because the response from traditionalist Catholics within that same diocese was not confined to words or public statements. It took the form of concrete action. On July 13, 2026, the community of St. Anthony, served by priests of the Society of St. Pius X for more than 45 years within that same diocese, closed on the purchase of 26 acres of land. The location is Iron Station, North Carolina, roughly 10 minutes from the community's current and increasingly inadequate chapel. The purchase price was approximately $2.8 million. This was not an improvised or impulsive gesture undertaken in a moment of frustration with the diocese. It represented the culmination of 3 full years of careful research, involving the systematic analysis of more than 1,300 separate properties before this specific parcel was finally selected, and it required formal approval from the Society's own leadership before the purchase could proceed. And the plans attached to this newly acquired land are genuinely substantial in scope. First, a multi-purpose building incorporating a large interim chapel, classrooms, and administrative offices. Then, eventually, a full and permanent church designed to seat approximately 600 faithful. Beyond that, residences for the priests serving the community, dedicated space for teaching sisters, a school, and even a cemetery. This is not a makeshift or temporary chapel thrown together under pressure. It is an entire Catholic campus, deliberately designed and planned to serve multiple generations of the faithful well into the future. The project's leader described the significance of this moment in words that carried genuine weight. The message, he said, is one of profound hope. New bishops have now been consecrated. New priests will follow from them. And now, in Iron Station, there will be an actual physical place where those priests can live and where the sacraments can be offered to a growing community for generations to come. And he added a longer historical perspective worth taking seriously in its own right. We overcame the crisis of 1988, he said, in essence. We will overcome this one as well. In 100 years, he suggested, many people will look back and recognize that the Catholic faith and its ancient liturgy were genuinely rediscovered in this specific place, rather than lost. There is a detail here that makes the entire situation even more striking than it might first appear. This particular community has been faithfully serving Catholics in the Charlotte area for more than 45 consecutive years, and it has grown steadily over that long span of time, to the point where it can no longer be adequately accommodated within its existing physical space. This is not a project springing suddenly from nothing, manufactured for dramatic effect in direct response to the current controversy. It is the natural culmination of a slowly and steadily maturing harvest that had already been building for decades before any of the events of 2025 or 2026 ever took place. And the extended land search itself confirms this deeper timeline. 3 full years of deliberate searching, an area spanning thousands of square kilometers carefully surveyed. More than 1,000 individual properties examined in detail before this specific parcel was finally chosen. This was never a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was, from its very beginning, a genuinely long-term one. Here, then, are the 2 images of this same diocese, finally placed directly beside one another. On one side, masses closed, altar rails physically removed from churches, a door held open only after considerable damage had already been done to the community being invited through it. On the other side, 26 acres of newly purchased land and an entire church rising from the ground to meet a community that has clearly outgrown everything it previously had available to it. And this, it needs to be said plainly, is not merely a local curiosity confined to one diocese in North Carolina. It is only the most visible and most dramatically illustrated tip of a considerably broader pattern running through the entire landscape of the Western Church. A pattern that becomes unmistakable the moment it is examined honestly and at a wider scale rather than treated as a series of unrelated local anecdotes. Consider the broader picture unfolding in these same months. On the opposite side of the United States, another diocese announced the closure of Sunday Mass in 7 separate parishes, citing a shortage of both priests and faithful sufficient to justify keeping those communities open. And in France, a comprehensive study documented 91 contemplative monasteries closed over the span of 20 years, representing nearly 1/3 of the total number of such monasteries that existed in that country at the beginning of the period studied. These are places dedicated specifically to the purest and most concentrated form of prayer within the entire Catholic tradition. Monastic communities whose entire purpose is contemplative worship rather than active pastoral ministry. And they have been closing steadily, one after another, across 2 full decades. But within that same comprehensive French study lies a fact that deserves to be stated with complete clarity, because it cannot honestly be ignored or explained away by anyone examining the data in good faith. Among all the categories of monasteries included in that research, there exists one specific category that experienced not a single closure across the entire 20-year period studied, not one. These are precisely the monasteries that maintained their liturgy entirely in Latin, according to the traditional form. 0 closures, across 2 full decades, while comparable communities using other liturgical forms collapsed steadily around them. This is not a matter of personal opinion or ideological preference expressed by commentators sympathetic to tradition. It is documented empirical research, verifiable and independently conducted, standing as hard evidence rather than anecdote. And here, the underlying pattern reveals itself with a clarity that becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss once all these separate threads are drawn together. Where tradition has been progressively abandoned, restricted, or actively suppressed, churches close their doors, convents empty and eventually shut down entirely. And monasteries founded specifically for prayer cease to exist as living communities. Where tradition has instead been preserved, protected, and allowed to flourish according to its own internal logic and discipline, land is purchased, new buildings rise from the ground, and entire multi-generational campuses are planned and constructed with genuine confidence about the decades still to come. This is not simply a matter of raw numbers considered in isolation, interesting as those numbers already are on their own. It points towards something considerably deeper, a fundamental problem embedded in an entire pastoral and liturgical approach that has now had more than 5 decades to demonstrate its actual fruits, for better or for worse, across the full breadth of the Western Church. What was confidently presented, beginning in the years immediately following the Second Vatican Council, as the dawn of a genuine springtime for the Catholic Church, a season of renewal, of increased participation, of a church finally speaking a language the modern world could understand and embrace, has turned out, in a great many concrete and now well-documented places, to be something considerably closer to a long and largely unacknowledged winter. Empty pews where the springtime was promised, closed monasteries where renewed vocations were expected, shuttered parishes where a more accessible and contemporary liturgical style was supposed to draw in exactly the young families and searching souls that instead simply stopped attending altogether. And within that same long winter, the seeds of renewed and genuine growth are sprouting precisely in the specific places where the architects of that original renewal least expected or least wanted them to appear. Among those who have clung, often at real personal and institutional cost, to the same ancient Mass, the same unaltered sacramental discipline, the same doctrinal formulations received without modification from previous generations, there are even those within the Church's own active clergy who have begun saying this openly now, and saying it at genuine personal cost to themselves. The seriously ill Austrian priest, whose situation this channel has already covered in detail, a man confined largely to his own home by illness and threatened with formal suspension for his public writing, defended precisely this world of preserved tradition publicly, fully aware of the specific institutional risk he was accepting by doing so. His is, admittedly, a single individual voice among many thousands of Catholic clergy worldwide. But it stands as a genuine sign that the willingness to acknowledge honestly where actual spiritual life continues to be found, even at real professional and institutional cost to the person making that acknowledgement, is beginning to spread more broadly within the diocesan clergy itself, not merely among priests already formally affiliated with explicitly traditionalist religious communities and institutes. The desire for the sacred, genuinely experienced and genuinely sought after by ordinary believers across every culture and every generation, cannot simply be legislated out of existence through administrative decree, however well-intentioned that decree might be in its original conception. Restricting access to a particular liturgical form does not eliminate the underlying spiritual hunger that drew people toward it in the first place. It simply redirects that hunger toward wherever it can still be satisfied, sometimes toward genuinely healthy and fully regularized traditional communities operating in full communion with Rome, and in the most extreme and painful cases, toward communities that have moved into open rupture with the Church's visible unity altogether. But precisely for the sake of maintaining the honest and unflinching commitment to truth that this channel has consistently tried to maintain across every difficult and controversial topic it has covered, the underlying facts here cannot simply be waved away or explained away through convenient appeals to secularization alone, however real and significant secularization's broader cultural effects genuinely are across the entire Western world. And the facts, examined honestly and without either exaggeration or convenient minimization, tell a story that is difficult to escape once it has actually been laid out in full. Where the sense of the sacred has been allowed to fade or has been actively suppressed through administrative restriction, the Church empties, steadily and measurably, parish by parish and monastery by monastery. Where that same sense of the sacred has instead been carefully preserved and protected, the Church is visibly and measurably reborn, growing, expanding, and in cases like Iron Station, North Carolina, literally purchasing new land and breaking ground for buildings intended to serve congregations still being formed and communities not yet even born. This is not, in the end, fundamentally a question of ecclesiastical left versus ecclesiastical right, of competing partisan camps within the Church, each defending their own preferred faction against the other, according to essentially political categories imported from outside the Church's own proper self-understanding. It is a question that runs considerably deeper than any such political framing can adequately capture. It is a question of roots, of the basic and irreplaceable connection between a living tradition and the ongoing fruitfulness of the community that either maintains or severs that connection over time. A tree cut away from its own roots, however carefully and skillfully it might subsequently be pruned and tended by well-meaning and genuinely sincere caretakers, does not go on to bear abundant fruit, regardless of how much careful cultivation is subsequently applied to its remaining branches. It simply, eventually withers, regardless of the sincerity or the pastoral good intentions of those doing the pruning. The story of Charlotte, North Carolina, taken as a single self-contained case study, illustrates this broader principle with a clarity that would be difficult to achieve through abstract argument alone. A bishop closes the ancient Mass in parish after parish across his diocese, removes the physical supports that had allowed the faithful to kneel in reverence while receiving Holy Communion, and then, following the events of July 2026, writes an outwardly warm and inviting pastoral letter to precisely the community he had already spent the preceding 14 months making life considerably more difficult for. And that same community responds not with bitterness, not with public recrimination directed at their own bishop, and not with departure from the Catholic Church altogether, but with 26 acres of carefully researched land, a detailed and genuinely ambitious set of architectural plans, and a stated confidence that in 100 years, people will look back on this specific moment in Iron Station and recognize it as a place where the Catholic faith was rediscovered and allowed to flourish, rather than a place where it was ultimately lost to institutional pressure and restriction. Whether that confident 100-year prediction actually proves accurate, no one observing these events today can say with absolute certainty. But the 26 acres are real. The architectural plans already drawn up are real. The 3 years of careful research behind the specific choice of location are real. and the pattern connecting Charlotte to the broader landscape of closed parishes in other American dioceses and to the documented French monastery study, a pattern in which growth and construction consistently appear precisely where tradition has been preserved, and closure consistently appears precisely where it has been progressively abandoned or restricted, is not something that can simply be dismissed as an isolated coincidence limited to one specific diocese or one specific religious community. It points instead toward a genuine and uncomfortable question that the wider Church, at every level of her hierarchy, may eventually need to confront directly and honestly, rather than continuing to explain away through convenient appeals to secularization alone, or through selective attention to whichever individual data points happen to support whatever institutional narrative currently feels most comfortable to maintain. If the specific communities that have preserved the ancient liturgy and the ancient sacramental discipline are consistently the ones purchasing land, building new churches, and confidently planning for future generations, while the communities that adopted a more contemporary and administratively flexible approach are just as consistently the ones closing their doors, consolidating their remaining parishes, and watching their own numbers steadily decline, then the question of which specific approach genuinely serves the long-term future and vitality of the Catholic Church stops being a matter of abstract ideological preference between competing factions. It becomes, instead, a matter of simple and observable fact, verifiable by anyone willing to look honestly at where the actual growth and where the actual decline are each taking place across the wider landscape of the contemporary Church. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.